I tried beating Terraria, but I can freeze time. As soon as I spawned into the world, I made my way over to the ice biome and entered a cave. Within the cave, I found a chest with flurry boots, and as I ventured further down, I got trapped by undead Vikings. This is where I decided to test out my overpowered skill of stopping time. I activated it, and every single mob within my vicinity stopped moving. I could deal as much damage as I wanted to them, and as soon as time resumed, this is what happened. Yeah, we absolutely obliterated through all of them. This is going to be a very, very fun challenge. Boss fights become 100 times more fun to do with this. I picked myself up a life crystal, and opened up another chest to find myself an ice blade. This is going to be a perfect weapon because it shoots projectiles, meaning we can stack them over and over again before the time unfreezes. I made my way back up to the surface, picked up some iron ore, and made my way over to the left. I got overwhelmed by the slimes in the jungle, so I decided to freeze time again and one-shot every single one of them. God, how much I love this. I went into the jungle to pick up more life crystals, ores, and some loot from the chests. I wasn't careful enough, I took fall damage, stepped on a poison dart trap, and ended up dying. Once I came back to spawn, it was nighttime and I summoned in the Eye of Cthulhu. I froze time, spammed it with my weapon, and as soon as the time resumed, we absolutely demolished this boss. I built a house for the guide, placed down some chests for storage, and ventured over to the right side of the world in hopes of fighting Skeletron. While doing this, I stumbled upon and looted a pyramid which gave us a magic carpet, and as I made it to Skeletron's dungeon, it turned to daytime. I waited by Skeletron's dungeon until it turned to nighttime, and once it was night, I summoned in Skeletron, froze the time, and absolutely bullied this boss. I made my way down to the dungeon and tried to pick up as many water candles as I could, while at the same time opening up the dungeon chests. I got myself 2 more Amasas, the handgun, but before I can get all the water candles, I ended up dying. Upon coming back to spawn, I used 2 random teleportation potions which teleported me to a random cave which had some life crystals, and after an unexplored area of the jungle. I picked up as many stingers as I could, as well as jungle spores, and made my way back to spawn. After this, I went over to the corruption biome and started blowing up the shadow orbs in order to summon in the Eater of Worlds. As soon as I spawned in, I tried to take him with my Muramasa, but I was barely doing any damage. Of course, I waited for the perfect moment to freeze time, and during the couple of frozen seconds that we had, I split him up into tiny little pieces and then proceeded to take him out when time was unfrozen. I used all of the loot from the Eye of Cthulhu and the Eater of Worlds to craft myself a nightmare pickaxe and dig myself out a elevator. After nearly finishing the elevator, I was picking up obsidian because we're gonna need it to craft ourselves some hellstone bars, but every single time I tried to get it, I kept on dying. Upon coming back to the surface, the goblins invaded us, so I had to take care of that, and what I mean by take care of that is I stood in one spot AFK with a macro on, literally just spamming my sword. But yeah, we took the goblins out, and after this, I made my way down to the underworld. I ended up dying to lava, and upon making my way back to spawn, I decided to break down some trees in order to craft myself the Louis AFK prison builder. Using the prison builder, I made a bunch of NPC prisons, I mean homes of course, and after this, I made my way down to the underworld to pick up more hellstone. I kept on dying to lava non-stop, so this took me a while, but after I had a sufficient amount of hellstone, I crafted myself the fiery greatsword and combined all the 4 swords that I had up until now to craft myself the Knight's Edge. I went down to the underworld to get more hellstone because I needed a set of full hellstone armor, and after that was complete, I went back over to the jungle in search for more life crystals. I tend to find that the jungle has the most life crystals out of any other biome, and it's probably the easiest to find just because it's so open and you can so easily traverse around the area. So after spending only like 10 minutes within the jungle, I found tons of life crystals, and as I came back to spawn, I was at max HP. Now there was only one thing left to do. Can you guess what it is? That's right, we have to fight the Wall of Flesh. I went down to the underworld, went over to the right side of the world, and chucked the guide voodoo doll into lava. I tried to take out as much of the hungry as I could with the Knight's Edge before stopping time and absolutely cheesing this boss. After time resumed, we ended up killing this fleshy wall, and now we were officially in hard mode. I went over to the corruption and started breaking demon altars. I blessed my world with cobalt, orichalcum, and adamantite, and before I could break all the altars, I got killed by a wraith. I crafted myself a cobalt pickaxe because I already picked up a ton of cobalt within the corruption biome, and I went down my elevator in order to start mining for orichalcum. Once I got enough of that, I crafted myself an orichalcum anvil and then proceeded to make an orichalcum pickaxe. I organized my inventory, and at this point I went over to another corruption biome in order to break more demon altars because I couldn't find any adamantite. Once I broke those, I used the spelunker potion while going down to the underworld to pick up as much adamantite as I could, and once I had enough of that, I came back to spawn and crafted myself a full set of adamantite armor. What I didn't notice here is that I crafted a mage set of adamantite armor, giving me only 35 defense, and up until I defeated the mech bosses, I was wondering why my defense was so low throughout this whole playthrough and why I was dying so frequently. So yeah, that's a little bit stupid on my part. By this point, I was ready to fight the mechanical bosses, so I went down my elevator and started farming for the Souls of Night. With my low amount of defense, I died pretty quickly, but I had enough Souls of Night to craft most of the mechanical bosses, so now I went over to the underground hallowed biome and started farming farming out souls of light. I was getting completely overwhelmed by monsters, so I decided to use my time stop within the hallowed biome so I could actually have a shot at defeating these mobs and getting myself more souls of light. While farming for these souls, I managed to spot a hallowed mimic. Luckily, it dropped a daedalus stormbow, which I was super excited to see because that's one of the best weapons for defeating the mechanical bosses, so that is absolutely amazing. Very shortly after, I died and came back to spawn. I checked my inventory to see that I actually had a mechanical worm, which was most likely dropped by a mob upon death, but I just didn't notice. I was right about to summon in the destroyer, but then I realized maybe I should get myself a set of wings. I used the gravitation potion to make my way over to a sky island, and using the Louis AFK battler buffs, I got tons of wyverns to spawn, and upon freezing time, killing them, freezing time again, I got enough souls of flight as well as a giant harpy feather to craft myself the harpy wings. I bought some arrows for the merchant for the daedalus stormbow, and combined it with some stars to make myself Jester's arrows, which pierced through the destroyer. As it turned to nighttime, I summoned this mechanical worm and almost immediately froze the time. I chucked up as many arrows as it could, and as the time resumed, all of the arrows fell upon the destroyer like a barrage of meteors, taking out nearly a quarter of its health. No matter how hard I tried, due to my armor giving me horrific defense stats, I ended up taking an L to the destroyer, but instead of this, I decided to summon in the twins. As soon as I summoned them in, I froze the time and absolutely spammed spasmatism with as many attacks as I could before the time unfroze. This dealt almost half of its health worth of damage, and I was fairly confident that this was going to be a very easy fight. And boyos was I right. I froze the time once more to take out spasmatism completely, and now we had one eyeball left. I took out retinazer probably even faster than I took out the other twin, which leaves us with two more mechanical bosses that we have to get through. Using the hallowed bars, I crafted myself an Excalibur, and with a massive ego boost after defeating the twins, I really thought I was strong enough to take out Skeletron Prime. I started blasting with the daedalus stormbow, and as soon as I found the perfect opportunity, I froze the time. I let a barrage of arrows stack up above Skeletron, knowing that as soon as time continued, it's gonna drop all down on him. With that one attack, we took out nearly a quarter of his health. After my second time freeze recharged, I paused the time and dealt even more damage to this boss. I was fairly certain we were gonna defeat Skeletron Prime as we took out two of his hands, and he was already nearly dead. Adding insult to injury, I froze time once more, took out nearly all of his health, but before we could defeat him, with a sliver of health left, it turned to daytime and he one-shotted me. After this, I waited for it to turn to nighttime once more, and I had a rematch with the destroyer. I started the fight just like last time with a frozen time attack. We took out a quarter of its health, and I continued spamming him with my daedalus stormbow. We froze time once more, and I dealt so much damage to him that this mechanical worm was now only on a quarter HP. After this devastating blow, I took him out extremely quickly, and at this moment it was almost daytime, so I decided to wait for another night before fighting Skeletron Prime. During my spare time, I crafted myself some Jester's arrows, and this is where I realized that my defense was so low because I was wearing a mage set of adamantite armor. I got myself a hallowed mask because I sold all of my adamantite, and once it turned to nighttime, I started fighting Skeletron Prime. We started the battle with the most brutal time freeze. We absolutely shredded through so much of this boss's health, it was absolutely insane. While waiting for my time freeze to recharge, I kept on spamming him with my daedalus stormbow, dealing a crazy amount of damage, and very soon after I used my time freeze again. I spammed a ton of arrows over his head, and once time resumed, his health was so low that we could probably take him out by just blowing at him. Well, that's roughly exactly what happened. We took out Skeletron Prime extremely easily, and now the jungle grows restless, meaning we can move on to Plantera. I crafted myself the pickaxe axe and made my way over to the jungle. In the search of Plantera's bulb, I actually found it extremely quickly, like we barely had to do any work, which is something I love to see because if you've seen any of my previous videos, this usually is the longest part of the entire playthrough. I picked up as much chlorophyte as I could because I wanted to craft myself a set of turtle armor before fighting Plantera, and once I got enough chlorophyte, I made my way back to spawn and crafted it all into bars. Using the Louis AFK battler buffs, I made my way back to the jungle and started farming for turtle shells. I'm not gonna lie, this took me probably a solid 2 hours of grinding just to get these 3 turtle shells. Check this out. I was at first on top of the jungle stopping time while killing turtles in order not to die because for some reason we were taking loads of damage and my weapons were greatly underpowered. After this, I re-strategized. I made my way down to the jungle, freezing time like a complete maniac non-stop. I would freeze time once, kill as many turtles as I can, freeze time right after that, kill even more mobs, and I essentially repeated this process until I got the 3 turtle shells that I needed. I came back to spawn, finally crafted myself that grueling set of turtle armor, and started building out the Plantera arena. Along with this, I got myself a master yo-yo bag and the Yelt's yo-yo, which really helped me out in the Plantera boss fight. Once the arena was built, I broke the Plantera bulb and summoned in the boss. Almost as soon as she spawned in, I froze the time and used this as my opportunity to deal as much damage to her as I could. While waiting for my time freeze to recharge, I absolutely destroyed Plantera using my yo-yo, and as soon as I had the ability to freeze time, I threw all of my best attacks at Plantera and demolished her in one final blow. After this, I went over to Golem's temple, looted his chests, built myself an arena, and summoned him in. I froze time almost immediately and spammed him with the grenade launcher to deal an absurd amount of damage in absolutely no time. After this, I came back to spawn and summoned a solar eclipse. I farmed out broken hero swords and crafted myself the Terra Blade. I went back to fighting Golem, and between freezing time and absolutely obliterating him with the Terra Blade, I killed him as many times as I needed until I got a pick saw. Once I got the pickaxe, I picked up his altar, made my way back to spawn, and went over to fight the lunatic cultist. This was a weird boss fight because as you froze time, he actually wouldn't die. For some reason, he would keep on teleporting around, and it was such a pain in the ass to kill him to the point where I just got confused and I didn't know what to do, so I teleported back home. After this, I defeated Golem 5 more times in order to get myself a full set of beetle armor as well as beetle wings. This was probably my favorite part of the whole playthrough because I kept on freezing time in the most creative ways. I really loved playing around with projectile weapons because as you shoot them, they would stay in one place, but once you unfreeze them, you'd have an entire barrage of projectiles coming down in a rainstorm of damage to whatever boss you were fighting, and it was absolutely overpowered. After this, I completely forgot to record my fight with the lunatic cultist, so here you go. I fought him after. I swear to God I killed him, I just forgot to press record. My bad. But now we moved on to fighting the celestial pillars. I started by trying to take out the stardust pillar first, and this was horrific. Every single time I get overwhelmed by mobs, I try to freeze time, but very shortly after, we would end up dying. This happened a couple times until we ended up taking out the stardust pillar, which then gave us the ability to move on to the solar pillar. While taking out this pillar, I had to use my time freeze far more frequently because as you know, the solar pillar is possibly the hardest thing to do in all of Terraria. And especially if you have the Terra Blade like me, don't try to do this with the Terra Blade. We died over and over and over again, and even though we had the mind-blowing ability to freeze time, we stood no chance against the solar pillar. After spending 30 minutes on this pillar, I finally managed to take it out, which next led us to the nebula pillar. Since I already defeated the solar pillar, I actually crafted myself the daybreak, which made absolutely quick work of the nebula pillar, leaving us one last pillar to go, which was the vortex pillar. This was once again similar to the solar pillar, absolutely atrocious. I died non-stop, and even though we had the overpowered ability to freeze time, we stood no chance against this. This took me multiple tries to take out, but eventually we did it, and once this was defeated, I went back to spawn. I built myself a tiny arena for Moonlord, and as my screen started shaking, I was panicking real hard. I really did not want to do this fight all over again, so I had to give it my all. My strategy for this whole boss fight was essentially this. As soon as he opened up his main eye, I would freeze the time and spam the eyeball with the daybreak. As soon as the time resumed, all of the daybreaks would hit it at once and deal an enormous amount of damage. As you can see, that's exactly what I did, and I followed this strategy for possibly the next 5 minutes. Every single time his eyes would open, I'd spam him with the daybreak or spam them with the solar eruption. We ended up taking all 3 of his eyes, and now the only thing left was his core. I got really scared here because I was super close to dying, but I managed to push through it, and as soon as I got the opportunity, I froze time, started spamming his core, took out so much of his health that he was essentially left as one shot. I let my minion finish off the remaining health, and the rest was history. Be sure to drop a like on the video. If this video gets 10,000 likes, I will do the same challenge with the Calamity mod. This video was possible using Fargo's Souls mod and the Stardust enchantment, so if you want to try this for yourself, that's exactly where I got it from. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. This has been Boio. Peace out.